Welcome back to Education Matters. Did you correctly answer D, 29%? While the communities outside Charlotte that may create charter schools for their own residents are 78% white, Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools are only 29% white, with the remaining largely black and Latino. We're going to continue our discussion with award-winning New York Times Magazine reporter Nikole Hannah-Jones. Nikole, you've written about efforts that are similar to what we just talked about in that question. In Alabama, there's really where you saw towns secede, if you will, create their own smaller school districts. This is kind of a different variation?
Yeah, it's very, very similar. We are starting to see a wave of this across the South. So what made desegregation so successful in the South is most school districts were county-wide. And so you could pull from a very diverse range of students in order to integrate schools. As we know, black people tend to be concentrated in more urban areas, and the suburban and rural areas tend to be more white. Now we're starting to see in the South kind of the same fragmentation of the public schools that we see in the North, which has made desegregation very difficult. You're seeing white communities who are wanting to pull away or secede from very diverse school districts in order to keep their own tax dollars, but also really to maintain a racial balance in their schools that is majority white.
All right. Now, one of the arguments that we hear sometimes is that schools are not really getting more segregated, but the racial demographics are changing. There's just more black and brown students, so therefore the schools are a higher percentage. Does that hold up with the numbers?
I mean, to some degree, absolutely. We know that in the last 20 years, we've seen a huge influx of Latino students and a smaller percentage of white children being born overall. But that doesn't account for a lot of the segregation that we see, particularly in places like Charlotte-Mecklenburg or in Wake County. What you're seeing is a withdrawal of white parents from the public system, or a lot of charter schools that are disproportionately white, siphoning white children out of the public system.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, now, you're in New York City. I mean, there's been a long, pretty vocal battle in there around the rapid growth of charters. We've seen a big growth of charter schools in North Carolina in addition to other school choice. Sort of what role does charter schools and school choice efforts, sort of what role does it play in these issues around resegregation?
I think the growth of charter schools is huge. It's different in New York because in New York, charter schools tend to serve low-income black and Latino students. But in North Carolina, charter schools are actually increasing segregation because they are being used as escape hatches for white children. And so you are, again, taking white children out of districts that are very much so struggling to maintain a racial balance in their schools. And of course, the fewer and fewer white children you have in your schools, and the fewer and fewer middle-income children you have in your schools, the harder that balance becomes. And then it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because as charter schools are drawing funding out of the schools, then the traditional public schools begin to deteriorate, and then people say, well, we need more charters because the schools aren't serving our kids well. Well, that's because they are losing large numbers of funding. Right. And so for those who are seeking to profit off of children, it becomes very easy for charter schools to become predatory in communities. And a lot of times, they actually are not producing better results than the public schools, but we've come to kind of glamorize this idea of choice, and then as long as we have choice, it doesn't matter if we're actually not producing better results. I tend to be a person who believes that public funding should be going into public schools that have public accountability.
Now, private school vouchers, we have that program in North Carolina too. Same issue, or is it different in terms of the impact on segregation?
Oh, it's absolutely the same. When you look at who can actually use private school vouchers, the money is generally not enough to get into the great private schools that were sold. And so often, people are using vouchers to go into private schools that academically aren't really better, but they are more segregated. Private schools don't have to take every student, and so they tend to take a lot fewer students with disabilities or students that may have other special needs. And again, it's drawing money out of public education and putting them into private schools. The research on vouchers is actually very clear that students who leave public schools on vouchers actually do not see gains in achievement, which is the whole idea behind vouchers is giving parents choice means they're going to get a better education. The market is not always better.
Right. Who are you writing for when you talk? I mean, you're making an argument that that we need to, the integration is the one reform that works.
Yes.
And that our children will be better off. Who are you trying to convince? Is it Southerners? Is it Northerners? Is it progressives? Is it Trump voters? Is it Obama Trump voters? I mean, who do you think needs to understand things?
I think I am centrally making my argument to white progressives who say they believe in public education, say they believe in equality, yet are sustaining systems that permit a great deal of inequality. There was a period of time where we understood, even though we were often being forced to integrate, that this was the right thing to do for kids. And probably for at least the last 20 years, we've not talked about school segregation at all. We've talked about making separate schools equal. We don't need to break up high poverty and racially segregated schools. We just need to give them more accountability. Except the results are very clear. It has not worked. The same reason that we know that ghettoizing people in neighborhoods is very destructive, that is the same thing that is true for schools. Right. Our kids deserve a chance to be in the same classrooms together and to get the same resources together. And I'm trying to get education advocates, politicians, and regular citizens who say they believe in equal education to actually do something to ensure that we are getting that for all of our children.
And that's just as we begin to wrap up, you've said that, I mean, there's nothing magic about black students sitting next to a white student. There's not some transfer of knowledge, but right. It is about if integration brings about more equitable resources, funding, support. Is that sort of where you see it?
Absolutely. We have not, for a single day in this country, made separate schools for black children equal to white schools. There's no evidence that we have ever done that. There's no reason to believe that we ever will. But also that separation is just unnatural. That separation tells our children that some children are inferior and some children are superior. And when they have to be mixed in the same classrooms together, they come to see each other as equals. And I think that's a society we really want.
Do Americans believe in the public good?
I think that we have seen a massive erosion of the belief in the public good, and that we have come to think about what I think is our greatest public good, which are schools, as being about the market and consumerism and individualism. I think a lot of my work is trying to get us to step back and to understand that we shouldn't just look out for our own best interests, but we should look out for the interests of all the children in our community and understand that it benefits us all to have an educated population, not just ourselves. But I think our work, we have a lot of work to do to start framing this again as not being just about the individual, but being about all of us.
That sounds like a good place to wrap it up. Nikole Hannah-Jones, thank you so much for being with us on the show today. We appreciate your insights.
Thank you.
After the break, this week's Leadership Spotlight.